Okie dokie. Hey gang, it's Patrick Kirby from Do Good Better Consulting. How are you today? I am stoked to have another guest expert come and help us train on all things nonprofits and all things fundraising. It's going to be fantastic. I'd like everyone to welcome my buddy Matt from DonorDock. He's going to be joining us today to talk about data and the things that you need to know, the things you don't need to know, and then answering anybody's questions or concerns about what sort of data you need. So I will give the floor to Matt to kind of give an introduction to himself, why you're here to talk about data things, your background, what got us connected, and then we'll rock and roll from there.
Perfect. Thanks, Patrick. So my name's Matt Bitzegaio. I'm the founder of DonorDock. We're a nonprofit-focused CRM and database tool to help organizations do more fundraising, achieve more with spending less time. And, you know, my background, I've spent the last 16 years working in the for-profit and nonprofit sector, really focused around software development and CRM. And in that time have really learned in a lot of ways what works well for organizations, both in the for-profit and nonprofit sector. Kind of found this passion for working with nonprofits the last 4 or 5 years of my career and launched DonorDock in 2017 with the vision of helping nonprofits leverage technology to do more by providing tools that are intuitive, easy to use, and actually help provide coaching. So I'm a really data-driven person. I think, you know, data is such an important part of any organization, regardless of what type of organization it is. And so I love the idea of being able to chat with you today about, you know, how data can impact organizations.
One of the most complicated things on earth is a development director who is inundated with data. You can get from a gift to a gift size, to a date of birth, to an address, to an alternate address, to a winter home. Like, what it is the most obnoxious thing in the entire world. And I think one of the first of all, one of the great things about working with somebody who's from a for-profit world, having a for-profit perspective on a nonprofit industry that relies on data, and then somebody who comes from the nonprofit world or from the for-profit world who lived in data and how to gain access to it, I think is brilliant. So this is going to be kind of fun for everybody. So let's kind of talk about some general stuff. The basics of the basics of what you need to know as somebody who's in development, who's working with donors and donor databases. Again, whether that is a spreadsheet or a piece of paper or a fancy pants system or whatever, what kind of particular data should we be looking at to start? Like the basics of the basics.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, you know, to even go a level higher than that, I think one of the things that organizations need to be thinking about at the very highest level is, you know, what's their strategy on how to use the data that they are tracking, regardless of how they track it. I think that one of the things I've seen over and over and over again in both for-profits and nonprofits is this idea that people get a warm fuzzy from thinking they're tracking data, right? But if they don't have a solid strategy of how to actually use the data to move their organization forward, they're just wasting time. I always say the only thing worse than not tracking any data at all is tracking data you don't use. Because at least if you're not tracking anything, you're not wasting time with it. If you're tracking data and not using it, you're actually taking the time to track it in some way and then not using it. And I just saw a survey. It was like 500 nonprofits the other day that it was something like 13% of the organizations surveyed said they actually use data to make decisions. And so I think, you know, going back, it's great to know what to track, but starting out by saying, how are we going to use what we track will help to start guide you in the right direction on what information your organization does need. So that's just something I like to throw out there as really a fundamental foundational piece to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's the 2 points that you brought up brilliantly. What the hell are you using it for? And then what do you not need? Or what are you tracking that you have no use for, but it's just filling up space and time? and energy that if you were a multi-bazillion-dollar organization and you are an analytical-driven data management system that is tracking the I don't know, whatever the percentage of bread that you're purchasing on a weekly basis, like that, that's so outside of the mainstream for small and medium-sized nonprofits, is that you just need to think from the big picture on what you're actually trying to gain by gaining data knowledge in the first place.
Yeah, so some of the trends that I think we see, again, regardless of the type of organization or the size of organization that you are, so one thing we're trying to understand is our effectiveness, right? So that's one goal of tracking data, is how are we doing as an organization as it relates to fundraising or serving our clients or whatever it is that we're trying to do. So analytics is a big key to that. You know, that's a big goal as it relates to data. Better engaging with our donors. That's another thing that good data should help drive actions and activity that help you engage more effectively with your donors, because as we know, more engagement usually equates to more dollars fundraised. And there's kind of a formula that you can look at there. And so those are a couple of like key fundamental things to me that are very tangible benefits of tracking data in any size organization. And that's actually where I usually tell people to start is, let's use those as our two goals. We want to understand our organization better, and we want to better engage our donors. And all of that helps us make better decisions in how we're doing things. So I think at this point, we've kind of laid out then, those are the goals. Let's talk about those goals today, and like, what are the kinds of data then that we need to track? How do we track it to drive those goals forward?
Perfect. And I think, for 30 minutes, I think a really good thing to segment would be, let's talk about donor engagement as a whole. Let's do that. If we can walk away with something today in 30 minutes, is what are a handful of things that we can do today, and what data can we collect and can we track that's going to help our donor engagement today. So let's talk about some key things that you have to have when you want to track donor engagement.
Yeah, so at a base level, you obviously have to have information about your donors, whatever that is. And in surveying and working with a lot of organizations, it just varies wildly as to what information you have available. And that's a lot of times dependent on the source of the data. How did you get the data? When we were first building DonorDock, we talked to a lot of small to mid-sized organizations and said, what's the core information you typically have about a donor? And the answers were, a lot of times, we always have a name. Usually we have a name. We sometimes will have an email, maybe we'll have an address or a phone number, but rarely do we have all of that information. And so, there are certain ways where you can capture information. Online giving tools that you may use are going to capture more information than other, mechanisms you might have. But what I like to tell people is, if you have a name, get them into your system. Now you have an identity that you're working with, and you can start tracking data against that and build that donor record out over time as you learn more information about that. So at a very base level, I would say name, and if you can, one other piece of contact information, whether it's a phone number, an email, an address. Those are the things that to me are at a really core level. And it's interesting, the very basic amount of data that we're going to talk about here, how much you can drive from a donor engagement and analytics standpoint, just getting those basics. So that to me is like the foundation. You got to have a name. And then from there we'll build out,
Perfect. So talk about that too. So, cause I think it's interesting, cause most people I think would hear you say, it's amazing what you can drive with just the bare minimum amount of information, right? So a lot of nonprofits don't move forward with a lot of things because they don't have everything, right? Until we have every piece of information that's ever been available to this one person, I will not go forward with a call or an introduction or blah, 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 right? So they refuse to move the needle forward because they are not inundated with the amount of information. So I think it's super intriguing because I always love when you say this too, is you only need at a bare minimum this, and you can also drive some donor engagement. How?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things. I'm a big proponent in the whole concept of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so,
Yes.
I'm, as a very action-oriented person myself, I want systems that allow me to move things forward regardless of what I have as best I can. And so I don't disagree at all. I think that's nonprofits, it's for-profits. There is this really common feeling out there that unless I have everything, it's not worth doing anything. And I just think that's a really flawed way of thinking. And so, when we talk about donor engagement and what's the bare minimum that we need to have. So we mentioned, obviously at the donor level, we got to have that name, and it's nice to have another piece of contact information, because to really engage with donors, you have to contact them in a lot of ways. That the action that you drive is about interactions and engagement. So contact information of some sort is really powerful. Outside of that, the other thing that I think is an absolute must, but is quite simple, is some very basic gift information about the donations or the gifts that you've received from these donors. And so when we talk about that, we say, really what you need to know is who gave you the money, how much did they give you, and when did they give it to you? And if you have those three key pieces of information, you can really, really drive a lot of interactions and engagement with those donors and help try and cultivate them and turn them into larger donors over time. So it's pretty, when you boil it down, it's pretty simple. Everything else on top of that is nice to have, and you can use it for really deep engagement, but it's not necessarily an absolute must to be able to move those efforts forward.
Right. And so here's another thing that I think you just kind of scratched the surface on is if you have a name and you have a donation amount or the number of times. So let's just say it's a random donor who's donated twice to your organization. All of a sudden they pop up on your radar. But all you have is a donor's name and 2 gifts, right? Let's just say that's all the information you have. You're obligated as a development director to do some digging and some research on data to get more information. This stuff does not just fall on your plate. You got to put in the work, right? A lot of people will just assume, oh, I don't have the data for it, I can't do anything with it, I shouldn't do anything with it because they haven't offered it up. Well, that's where you put on your sleuthing, your detective hats to say, okay, let's connect the dots here. Let's do a little digging and research, whether it's Facebook stalking, LinkedIn stalking, looking in the local papers or the regional papers where other places they may have donated. And all of a sudden you can start connecting the dots to who this person is and why they may have given to you in the first place, so that when you interact with them or you reach out to them as a thank you note or you reach out to them on social media, you have a better understanding of what the story is. But you have to take that first step. This is not all going to fall on your plate. And even if you mine some of this data and you pay a company to give you a whole bunch of information, it doesn't mean anything unless you have some sort of connection to your own organization. So I think that is a brilliant way to actually start this whole data conversation and the data process.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about building more effective relationships at the end of the day. And so the more you know about a person, a donor, the more you are able to ascertain about them and their connection to your organization. Why are they giving? What are their giving patterns and so forth? Obviously, those things, allow you to engage even at a deeper level. But when you think about, especially small organizations, they get overwhelmed when you start talking about or thinking about all these different, slicing and dicing of data in all these different ways. And that's where I think it's so important to say, those are great things to strive for. Those are great things that work in those directions, but don't let that overwhelm you from taking that first step, which is, let's just start capturing and collecting this basic amount of data that we can and using it where we can within the organization.
So I think the using the information is a logical next step. Okay, so you've got your name, you've got a couple of gifts in mind, you maybe have an address. Some of the interesting information that you should be looking out for or recording or capturing is something to the effect of, like, let's just say a birthday, a work anniversary. Some of this stuff you can do on social media, but if you're not connected on Facebook or you're not connected on Twitter, you might not know some of those things that are automatically generated for you. Like, hey, congratulate so-and-so who's been working at this company. Another round of information that's really interesting, who the spouse is, if they have one, and then who kids are. I think a lot of when we're getting that next level of donor relationships is trying to connect the dots to, okay, if dad or mom gives and son or daughter gives, how do you know that they're connected if they have different last names? And then what do you do with that information? Because I think individual families that give to a certain organization all of a sudden opens up Pandora's box as far as relationships go to your particular organization.
Yeah, that whole householding piece is actually an area within most nonprofit CRMs and fundraising tools that creates a ton of complexity for people. And I've not seen a lot of tools that really do it that well or that effectively without making it so complicated that people don't do it. See, that's the other thing of all this is anything you're going to do as an organization, you've got to do it in a way that doesn't create such a burden for yourself that you either stop doing it or aren't consistent doing it, because that's almost worse. Having inconsistent tracking of data is almost, again, worse than not tracking data at all. But that's just an aside. The idea of householding is important, and building and tracking those relationships can be very powerful. And, there's things like date of birth, work anniversaries, those are all really typical and traditional CRM type things that you would track, whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit. They're just about building better, more informed relationships with your donors, your customers, whoever it is. But in the nonprofit world, then we take a step into, there are a lot of things as it relates to tracking of gifts, for example, that you need to be thinking of and watching for that maybe a for-profit world, it doesn't matter. They're very specific to the nonprofit. And those are things that I'm thinking of. You mentioned, that idea of a person giving their second gift, or, a person giving their first gift, or a spike up, whatever these triggers are that dictate that you as a development officer, it goes back to what you made a point earlier, that it's incumbent on a development officer to go out and find information about people and fill those records in. It's also part of their job and responsibility to engage when the time is right with donors. And so, thinking back about what are we trying to track that helps drive engagement, being able to, even just those basics of gift tracking, date, who gave it, dollar amount, can really drive a lot of important things if you know what you're watching for and what you're trying to understand. And that's where we get into, some methodology things around, what do I do when somebody gives their first gift? Or what do I do when somebody gives their second gift, or they give a spike up gift, or, maybe they're at risk of not giving anymore. I mean, those are all things that good tracking of data, and even just basic, I shouldn't even say the word good, even just basic tracking of data can help you drive those things forward if you are using those data points in the appropriate way to get the business intelligence back about what they're telling you.
And the other thing too is, and I think to take it even a step further as far as the basics of the basics, which is you need to send a thank you note when somebody gives you a gift.
Yep. Lowest common denominator.
Lowest common denominator, right? You need to appreciate that transactional value. But if you know when the last time they donated, and you can say 3 months from now, I'm going to send them a random note about a random thing that we did here at our organization, because I think it's meaningful to them, without prompting from a gift, without prompting an ask out of that donor. And you're just stopping by to say, hey, I'm just thinking about you and I thought you'd appreciate this. And having the data to know that 90 days that you're going to actually send them a note to not solicit, but just to recognize either an accomplishment or just to say hi. Imagine how powerful that is, to know that you've got data that shows in 90 days that you're going to go and lift up this particular individual in whatever capacity that you want to, what's that now? What's that relationship now take your donor to organization? It's completely different. It has nothing to do with you gave me money and I'm going to say thanks. It is 90 days after you just gave me something, I'm going to say something nice to you either on social media. I'm going to use a channel like Twitter, or I'm going to use Facebook to tag you in a post that I thought you would like. And you get all that from one piece of data, which is a name and a gift. That's it. That's all the 2 data points you need. And all of a sudden, you're now a super rock star for just lifting up others.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. I mean, it goes back to those basics of it's all about building solid relationships with your donors, and data helps you do that. Even basic data helps you do that more effectively. Mm-hmm. And then every organization can aspire to more advanced usage of data. I mean, we start to think about the power of some of these things, and if you start to master the basics of these things and you're building really solid relationships and you have the systems that support it, then you start getting into really doing deep segmentation of your donor base based on preferences, based on affinity to certain programs that you're doing. But the data is what tells you all those things. If you do certain appeals and you have certain effectiveness from different appeals, guess what? The more effective appeals, and how do you know that? You know that by tracking the data that goes along with that of when did these gifts come in, why did they come in, what appeal did they come in from? You can start to repeat the things that are actually working for your organization, and that the data is telling you they're working. It takes it from this I think, I want, I feel way of running an organization to a data-driven approach and saying we can show that this stuff is working, and so we can repeat it and we can do it again knowing that it works. But all of that has to start with a solid foundation of getting the basics down and building from there. And so that's the stuff where the foundational piece is so important, but when you can get there and you can keep moving forward from there, it truly becomes transformational for organizations when you can start to slice and dice on how do people like to give? Well, if this person's affinity is to give online, let's do online appeals to them. If they like to send us a check, then sending them an email blast asking for an online gift is probably not the way to best engage them. So you start to understand, data helps you understand channel preferences for people, and the really, really effective nonprofits, I think just like the for-profit world, the ones that are really effective are the ones who understand that you need to support multiple channels of engaging with your donors, and you need to tailor the engagement to the preferences of each donor based on the history and the data that you have. So there's this whole, data opens up this whole world of making better business decisions or better decisions for a nonprofit. But it all starts with those basics.
And data, you've got gut instinct, right? And you've got data. And I think you can have data and it can either prove or disprove your gut instinct, which I think is invaluable to an organization that has all the feels, right? I feel that this appeal in the middle of August is going to be great. And then the data shows that it is god-awful and you should have never done that in the first place. But if you have a gut instinct on this particular timing of an appeal or a type of appeal, whether it's Health and Human Services, you've got this little segment of a story, or maybe it's a little more broad when it's at the end of the year, or you have a little more, you can prove all of this stuff in your gut with data. So when you go to your board of directors and you go to your senior executive team and say, hey, listen, my gut instinct says we should be putting this here and here, and the data proves of the last year that I'm correct. So get off my rear end and let me do what I do best, because I've got a whole system of data points that show I'm exactly right. Or instead of going up and saying, hey, I'm going to try this, this is a shot in the dark, and it doesn't work, at least you learn from your lessons really quickly, rather than trying to drag it out over the course of many years and then hopefully not be proven wrong. So this is a support system for people.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, failing quickly is a really important part of any organization.
Yes.
And so the data helps you understand that whether you're failing or not, and you can course correct much more quickly than if you're doing things off of just gut instinct or just I think, I want, I feel. So.
Right. And I think that's the most important part about data is that it's not, it seems scary if you are, a lot of people in the nonprofit world are of, I would say, my ilk. Use a lot of hands, use a lot of enthusiasm and being energetic. And the thought of a spreadsheet full of data scares the bejesus out of them because it's not compatible with my brain of, hey, let's get everything up here and running and whatever. I think the idea that it can prove or disprove quickly and get you corrected on a course, and you can get you aligned better and quicker, is a lot less terrifying than, hey, here's a bunch of data and a bunch of spreadsheets.
Yeah, well, and I think, and then the other piece to that puzzle is so many nonprofits, especially small ones, the people that are there because they care about the mission of what's going on within that nonprofit. And so in a lot of cases, the, fundraising background may not be there. They maybe have never done this before. And so data helps you, the right use of data helps coach you through that process to some degree and helps you end up learning and being more effective over time. And so, what I think you see too is a lot of people bristle at the idea of taking time to track data and put data in. But I would counter that with that in those scenarios, it's because they don't have the right frameworks and tool sets in place to actually be able to use that data effectively. So then if I have always found throughout my career that if you can show people how tracking that data makes their life better and easier and makes them more effective at what they're doing, and in this case actually means raising more money for their mission and moving that mission forward, if you can show them that, the burden of putting data in becomes much less, and they bristle much less at that idea because they are really seeing true business value out of what they're doing and the time that they're putting into it. And so that to me is what it really is all about, is that you've got to have the right things in place so that what you're doing is really providing benefit and providing value. And at the end of the day, that's what's moving your organization forward more quickly and allowing you to do more of whatever it is that you're doing in your mission.
Freaking brilliant. As always, it is a pleasure always talking to you. Okay, so I want to thank you for being here with us today, so that's awesome. And of course, you deserve at least 90 seconds to pitch whatever you got to pitch, which is probably DonorDock. And so you should do that. And then how can they get a hold of you and what do you do? Go.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me. DonorDock is a tool built specifically for small to mid-sized nonprofits. It is a fundraising tool that was built from the ground up, a CRM designed for organizations like who we deal with and who are on the call today, and small to mid-sized, 1 to 2 person, maybe 3 to 4 development people. But the idea with DonorDock is we built it to make it simple and intuitive, and all of the things that we've talked about today are baked right into the product. It's got deep analytics and dashboarding and reporting on all of those main things, and most of that's driven just by basic information like a name, a date, and a dollar amount. And so in addition to that analytics, we provide what we call the action board, which really takes all of this engagement activity and surfaces it up for you, so you don't have to be thinking about what do I need to be spending my time on. The system is coaching you on that all the time on a daily basis and making sure that you're doing the things that you need to do to move your fundraising forward. People can check it out at trydonordocks.com. We do a free 30-day trial. It's a very inexpensive tool, especially considering the value that it provides. And we're about a week away from launching a full online giving capability set within the product, and about a month away from releasing full email marketing, appeal marketing, email type functionality. So it really becomes a one-stop shop for these nonprofits to be able to manage everything they're doing related to fundraising. So pretty exciting.
I am stoked to know you before you become the Elon Musk of giving programs, so I can say I knew the guy when. Matt, thank you so much for being there. I will post this up on our page, and then in the comments we'll link everybody to DonorDock, and Matt will tag you in there to ask any questions there. Data Nerds Unite, we're out, and thanks for stopping by. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.